So, hey everyone, we are here today to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly of AI in marketing. Because it's South by, it's 2026, you have to talk about AI, right? But hopefully what makes this session a little bit different is that we've actually interviewed hundreds upon hundreds of advertisers and marketers, understanding what they're using, what's going well, what's not going so well, and we'll be looking at some really good and some not so good examples of outputs. But for your relief, it's not just me that you'll be hearing from today. I'm delighted to say, if we could go to the next slide, I'm joined by Emma. Emma, do you want to just say a few words to introduce yourself?
Yes, super excited to be here. I have been working within tech and AI transformation now for 15 years. I talk about AI transformation for marketers day in, day out. So really excited to talk through some of the data that GWI has here and contextualize it for what we're seeing really in market today.
Awesome. Next slide, please. So, yeah, we are going to look at the results of interviews with 550 advertisers and marketers from across the US. Big companies, small companies, different verticals, different levels of seniority, every type of company well reflected. We asked them what tools they're using, what benefits they're seeing, what challenges they're seeing, and what are the most common mistakes they're seeing in their teams. And we'll be diving into all of that. So, next slide. Apologies, there's lots of slides for us to crack through. Let's start with some basics. Not surprising, widespread adoption across the advertising and marketing industry at the moment. Around about 85% of people are already using AI regularly at work. Interestingly, though, it's only 50% who have completely adopted. There's still like a third who have dipped their toes in but would describe themselves as occasional users. So still a fair bit of work to go there to convince people. If we can go to the next slide, we can see the tool you might expect is indeed winning. ChatGPT is top of the pile when it comes to the tools that people are using at work. That said, there is a chasing pack. Gemini, Copilot, really not far behind. But perhaps the most interesting thing here, I would say, is that on average, a typical advertiser and marketer is using 4 different tools. That's 4 different sets of conversations, 4 different lots of context switching. I myself use 3 and I'm forever searching through to find which one I had the particular conversation with. So we might question how efficient that multi-GPT usage is and whether before too long we'll normalize around 1. If we can rapidly go to the next slide, please. What we can also see is that the majority of us in the industry are still using them for simpler tasks at the moment. That is our default go-to starting point. We're happiest summarizing data, having it analyze data, but over half of us are already using it for final deliverables. And as confidence and experience goes up, you have to imagine that that number will increase as well. And then final slide before I bring in Emma. What you can see is the people who haven't adopted actually can't really tell you why. So when we asked non-users, why are you not yet using AI? The most common response was, there isn't none. I don't understand why my company has not yet adopted. And interestingly, the younger you are, the more likely you are to say there's no logical reason. Conversely, the older you are, the more likely you were to say it's because of lack of expertise or lack of trust and transparency. What we see then is that young people are for sure shadow using on their own personal accounts. So if your company is not yet rolling out AI tools across the company, they'll be using them, just not within your line of sight. So I'm going to bring in Emma for a couple of questions. In the many clients that you're working with, are you seeing regular usage or are you seeing people kind of dip their toes in?
It's really interesting. So there's kind of 2 different kind of schools of thought. I think most people are using AI for some of the more manual, repetitive, basic tasks. So if you think about, you're writing slides or proposal, you're going to start to put that into Copilot or Gemini or whichever your tool is to help you do that. There's a lot of sort of making people individually more efficient that we see happen almost at every company. Everybody wants to be more efficient. They tend to be the tasks that people don't like to spend time on, that you can individually go ahead and use an AI tool for. Where we start to see the difference is you really want to be able to transform end-to-end workflows. And that is more complex to do. And it requires, that's not just an individual. You've now got to include multiple teams. You do need to have, senior buy-in to really make some of those transformative decisions. And that's where that difference really is. So I think there's this really kind of positive, and everybody understands the real benefits of AI. But it's kind of getting from, your individual tasks and efficiency to kind of true end-to-end kind of reinvention or redesign of a workflow.
Totally. Okay, and so you saw on the slide that on average we're using 4 different tools each. Like I use GWI, I use Claude, I use ChatGPT. Are we actually being that efficient if we're using that many tools?
It's an interesting one that I have 2 completely different opinions on this question. I think for an individual, I think it is exceptionally good to use different tools. I think for your career development, for your industry value, knowing multiple AI tools is really key. And if we think about general MarTech, just knowing one tool only, it's great if you know more tools because you can then compare them. You can critically evaluate what's most useful. So I think for an individual, I think it's great to know multiple AI tools and know how to use them. However, in a company, where you are trying to, really make your cost per acquisition decrease, right? The things like this that you're trying to do to really kind of get the most out of AI. You really want to be transforming, like I said, like full workflows. Like you think about processes where you're kind of transforming across teams and things like this. And if you're going across 4 different AI tools and you're like going to Nano Banana or one tool for your imagery, and then you're going to another tool for like your headers in your slides, and you're going to another tool for something else, you have to recraft your prompts for each one, contextualize it again for each one, and like you're losing some of the efficiency that AI can bring. So again, it's that connectivity that you can use, that really needs to be there in AI to get the most out of it. And that's where you start to think about orchestration agents, for example, that will do some of that work for you, so you don't have to go from one tool to another. And you can have kind of those agents kind of working together. Different schools of thought. I think it's really important to kind of know what's going on in industry for your individual benefit, but for a company, you do really want to start to sew these together, so you're not kind of losing some of that efficiency that you can gain.
And if we look at what's on the slide right now, you can kind of understand why AI is being so widely adopted. These are the most common pain points and challenges people say when they're trying to make decisions. And you can see, we'll come back to data coverage and availability later, but you can see for almost all of the others how impactful AI is going to be. And as a result, if we can flip to the next slide, I'm keeping you on your toes over there. Already, AI tools or AI-generated insights are the 3rd biggest go-to across 15 different business cases that we tested. Everything from concept testing to audience validation. Every single use case we looked at, AI insights are now the 2nd or 3rd most commonly used source when we're making decisions. Only typically behind our personal intuition, our gut feel, our experience. So what I would venture is happening is we're still most likely to turn to our own gut feeling, but we're validating it by what we find on ChatGPT, Claude, or whatever your tool of choice is, which has some benefits and it brings with it some challenges. But what you will see if you look down the list is those AI-generated insights are now ahead of far longer, more established sources that have been used by the industry for decades. So you've got to be pretty confident the insights coming out of those tools are robust and reliable. If we can go to the next slide, please. At the moment, though, people are overwhelmingly positive about the benefits it's bringing for their work. That doesn't mean they haven't got issues and concerns about some aspects of AI, but it's very context specific. They might have concerns about application over here, but in their work, if it's making them quicker, faster, more efficient, they are happy. And as you can see, it's across the board. There are hardly any detractors. In every single use case, every single task we tested, the majority, often over 80%, are super positive about the benefits that AI is bringing. And if we can flip to the next slide. And actually, what we're seeing when we interview pre-adopters and post-adopters is that the table stakes benefits are there. Yes, it does make your teams faster. Yes, it does make them more efficient. Yes, it does the things that you would expect. But once you've adopted and start using AI tools for analysis and audience understanding, there are far more transformational benefits that maybe aren't expected. So heavy users cite things like better team alignment because you're all speaking the same sort of source of insights. They talk about being able to understand customers better, actually reduce reliance on vendors, which is not such great news for me. But it shows you that if you adopt the right tool in the right way among your teams, the benefits are probably far greater than you would expect. So Emma, I'm going to turn to you again. If you remember that chart where AI is already in third place in terms of what's been used, is that surprising to you that it's already above other research and decision-making sources that have been around for far longer?
Yeah, I think it's super interesting to see kind of that trend and how quickly it's happened. Like if you think about 5 years ago, we like, you know, that wasn't part of the conversation, really. It wasn't used and trusted, you know, in everyday business decisions. So I think it's so interesting to kind of see how quickly that shift has really happened. And what was really interesting is kind of some of the pieces that it overtook, like social media and kind of stakeholder points of view and things like this, which was very interesting. I'd say one kind of point there, though, is really your AI-driven insights should be encompassing that social. It should be encompassing white papers. It should be encompassing like all of these other data points to make what you're getting out of AI that more, you know, trustful, factual. And that's really kind of, you know, a really kind of key point is for you to get the most out of AI, you need to have the right data foundation. It's, you know, we always use that phrase like garbage in, garbage out. When it, you know, we've all heard it,
that's
we've all used
version.
it, and it stays around when you know with AI. You do need that data foundation, and so I think it's quite interesting because AI should be based on all of these things and should have those included. And you do need to still have that human intuition and that human experience there, you know, as that really kind of strategic oversight of AI. So I think it's definitely an interesting one.
And are you surprised how positive people are? Are you seeing that with the clients you work with on the ground? Are there not more sort of detractors or skeptics out there than those numbers would imply?
So yeah, it's in an individual basis. I think everybody is very aware that AI is helpful. I tried to put together a point of view. I tasked myself to not use AI. Normally I would kind of like brain dump all my thoughts, throw it into AI to bring me back like a lovely structured response. I tasked myself to do it without it, and it was so hard. It's like, I haven't used this part of my brain in a while because I don't need to. I think we all know it's very, very useful. Like the pieces of you know, that we use AI for in our individual work or even in our personal lives, we know it's useful and we know that it makes us more efficient and we know it's helpful. I think the kind of the skepticism, I guess, that tends to come in with AI, it's not actually about efficiency. I think everyone's bought in on that. It's really about the things that we cannot control. It's a fear of, you know, job security. It's a fear of like, what does that mean for my role in the future? That tends to be really where the kind of like the fear or anxiety comes in, not around its actual usefulness. And, you know, we are seeing roles change, but generally what we see is roles are becoming much more strategic. You get to outsource, quite frankly, the more, I'm going to call it boring, manual pieces to, you know, whichever your tool of choice is, whether it's your Gemini, your Copilot, you know, you can outsource that piece and you get to make the decisions from it. That is a lot more interesting. So I tend to see the differences. Everyone knows it's useful. Everyone, on the whole, I'd say, you know, is starting to use it in some way, shape, or form. But yeah, it's out of control, which is, you know, most things where people get more nervous.
Yeah, okay, let's have some fun with the final section. If we can go to the next slide, please. So here's the reality. 84% of us are using AI tools to generate insights and help us make decisions. The majority are probably using the data that is available on the open web. And that data, if you're lucky, will be spot on for what you need. But very often, and certainly more often than not, it could be out of date, it could be static, it could be biased, it could be hallucinated. And it leads to situations like the image you see on the slide. So here I asked one of the industry-leading tools to create me what it thinks a typical electric vehicle driver looks like, using only the data available on the open web. Now, ignore the fact, if you can see it, that the charging cable is plugged into quite a strange place. That is not going to effectively help him move his vehicle. That's not what I want to draw your attention to. Really focus on the fact that when I asked for a typical representation, I got a middle-aged, white, suited and booted businessman. And while we can't tell from this image, if we could, I bet it's assumed that he's straight rather from the LGBT community. And actually, when you run a number of these tests, you see again and again and again, it's the same middle-aged white figures that come out. And because they tend to reuse the same physiognomy, it's literally the same guy appearing in context after context after context. Now, they are part of the audience, but they're not only the audience. And what we're seeing is, unless you're careful, unless you know how to prompt and test in the right way, it's this sort of mainstream, obvious, expected representation, and any sense of diversity or nuance is being left behind. The problem is AI tools are pre-programmed to give you the obvious, expected answer, and that leads to images like this. And if we can go to the next slide, you can see the power of plugging in the right data. I thought this example was very fitting for South by. We asked another leading AI tool to use the data available on the open web to produce an image of a typical country music fan in the US, and out pops the image on the left. You couldn't really get more stereotypical. We then plugged GWI's data in and asked it to do the same thing, exactly the same wording, and out pops the image on the right. Because actually, if you look at the data, it's a majority female audience, mainly in suburban settings with interests like gardening, alternative medicines, and using Pinterest. Such a different representation, and you can only imagine the different campaigns you would start planning depending on which of those two personas popped out. If we can go to the next slide. And what you can see if you start probing some of the insights that come out is there's so much stereotyping. There's so much just obvious, banal, not actually very helpful stuff coming out if you don't plug the right data in. And here we asked it to understand how to target Gen Z. It tells you they care about user-generated content and love TikTok. Great. The average person in the street could tell me that. I need something deeper, better, if it's going to become commercially actionable. These are the problems that we are up against unless we're getting the right data into the AI tools. And if we can go to the final slide, we are willing to trust, but what comes up again and again is this human trust issue. So the third biggest thing that we are looking for in order to trust outputs from agents is this idea of built-in human review. That's a paradox. You can't have a scalable AI solution and have humans review every one. But it speaks to the sort of worries and the frustrations that are probably going through marketers and advertisers' minds at the moment. So Emma, I'm going to turn to you again. Obviously, GWI is going to be biased in saying you need to plug the right data into your AI tool. But where do you stand on the data that's going into these tools?
It's exceptionally important to have good data in, and to think about what data you are using and where you're putting it. I think it's worth talking about security as well. You're not putting your confidential financial data into an external free tool, but it's really, really key. The data foundation that you use is going to impact the results that you get. Ultimately. So you do want to make sure that you have set your data up in the right way. You're using good data, clean data. It should be governed. The way that we think about it now is data really should be like a product. Marketers, we're a revenue driving part of the organization. Revenue matters. This is a product that can actually help accelerate your revenue. And so you do need, there's this huge focus on data governance, the quality of the data that you have. How is it set up? How is it contextualized? Also connecting across your different tools and data sources. So it's really important to have that strong data foundation, because now what you can get out of it is just amazing. We can now get answers to questions that we didn't even know that we could ask the questions to. There's just so much more that we can do, which is really exciting. I'm really excited to see what's going to happen in these next 5 years, and really the scale that companies are able to reach who really do lean on AI, because there is just so much that can be done. But it does all come down to the data foundation that you are using.
The final question, how do you strike that balance between the amazing potential of AI and the right level of human input, checking, verification?
Yeah, this is a great question, because it shouldn't be like humans are just removed from the equation. That's not really what we're seeing, expecting, or really kind of how it should be. What we are seeing is humans are now the orchestrators and the owners of multiple agents. They're owning workflows. So where you might need, previously you're kind of limited by like the number of headcount that you have on a particular function. You now have an owner. And that owner then has multiple agents, and you're just able to scale so much more, than what you could actually do before. So it's super interesting.
Awesome. I think we're at time, so both of us will be around afterwards if you want to grab us and ask any questions. Thank you, Emma. Thank you very much for listening, everyone.